So this is a historic day for me, as for the first time ever, I'm doing something called a podcast, and I have no idea what to do. But hopefully with some experience, I'll figure this out. Of course, you know I am a longtime member of the radio community, so speaking into a microphone shouldn't be that difficult. But Drew's Morning Dish will be offering a weekly podcast that will be done by me, Drew, and I will touch on whatever's relevant that week, whether or not it's Ravens or Orioles or Terps or maybe the Kansas City Royals winning the World Series. Who knows? But anything that has to do with sports, I'll be touching on it here every Tuesday at Drew's Morning Dish. And I thought today, I wondered, what am I going to do for my first podcast? What do people want to hear? And I was thinking maybe I should have someone interview me rather than me just sit here and talk for 30 or 40 minutes. We could talk about how good the Ravens are. We could talk about the great season the Orioles had, and we'll get to all that stuff. But I thought today would be a good day to start by having someone interview me. The Orioles once said I only had one listener, so I decided to bring him in. I don't actually know if he was the only one, but I decided to bring him in today, and I said, you have carte blanche to ask me whatever you want. You can interview me, and we'll figure out where I've been, what I've been doing for the last 2 months. I affectionately refer to the day of the mass firings at the former radio station where I worked. I call it Black Friday. I know technically Black Friday is the Friday after Thanksgiving where everyone goes out and shops, but we call it Black Friday. We call ourselves the Fired Five, which is sort of like the Fab Four, only there were 5 of us. So the Fab Fired Five, I guess. But I have a lot to talk about. I have a lot to tell you about. A lot has gone on over the last 2 months, and I'm excited to unveil our new website this week and show off all the work that we've been putting in at Drew's Morning Dish. It's much more than just a daily sports blog. There's a lot more going on than just me writing about sports. So let's do this. I'm excited about this. I don't know when the last time it was that I was actually interviewed. So I don't know. Maybe I'm not going to be any good at it. But I'm going to turn the microphone over to the interviewer, and I'm now going to be the interviewee. So here we go.
All right, Drew, I am your one listener, and it's good to be here with you today. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. They're questions that as I was driving around in my car or listening at home when you were on the radio, they're questions that always kept popping up into my mind, and I appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to try and ask these questions on behalf of if you had another listener, maybe the second or the third listener,
right?
Questions that they may ask you, but I'm going to let it fly. I'm going to start at the beginning.
Yeah, no softballs.
No
softballs. You can throw me fastballs. If you throw them in the dirt, I'll even swing at them like Adam Jones.
Well, that's fine. Hopefully you'll hit one, unlike Adam.
Yeah,
Jones.
no, don't lob anything to me. Here we go.
But I'm going to start at the beginning, and it's always been curious to me how you get from being a Glen Burnie Gopher,
a proud Glen Burnie
Gopher, Glen Burnie Gopher,
right,
to the general manager of the Baltimore Blast.
Okay, well that won't take long for me to recall because it's like it happened yesterday. I was attending a broadcasting school in Baltimore. This woman came in and she said, "We need interns for the new indoor soccer team. We need a marketing intern, and we need a PR intern." And here's how funny your life. Here's how weird it is, and your life changes on a coin flip, so to speak. There was a guy in the class named Tom Cooper, and we both raised our hands and said, "We'll be interns for you." I had been to a Blast game. I went in the 80-81 season. I went to see them play the Buffalo Stallions, and the Blast won the game 6-5. And I remember I remember those of us who went. We left the building that night, and we were like, "Oh my God, is that the greatest thing you've ever seen, or what?" It wasn't very tactical. It hadn't morphed at all into like this defensive formula that it did late in the 80s and the 90s. This was just soccer inside, kick it off the wall, go get it. It was phenomenal. So anyway, Tom Cooper raised his hand. I raised my hand. The woman, and her name was Mary Kopetsky, who turned out to be Mary Miklas. And if the name Miklas is familiar, it's because she married Bernie Miklas, who was a newspaper writer and the beat writer, and you can connect all of that however you would like. Bernie was the beat writer for the News American. He wrote about the blast. Mary was the PR director. So she said at the time, okay, which one of you wants to do marketing? Which one of you wants to do PR? And the PR meaning media relations, marketing meaning sponsorship services and stuff like that. So I looked at Tom, and he looked at me, and I said, I don't really care. And he said, well, let's just flip a coin. I said, okay. He said, heads, you get marketing. Tails, you get PR. I said, sure. And because tails never fails, he flipped it, and it came down tails. So I said, Mary, I'm yours. And she gave Tom his information. He would work for a guy named Kent Russell. And that was it. That's how I started. So I became a PR intern, and as I always like to affectionately remind myself and lots of other people, it started off in 1981 with me going and getting pizza for everybody. And in 1998, when I left, I was still going to get pizza for everybody. So in some ways, it didn't change a whole lot. So I started there in 1981. I was a PR intern for that first year. The summer of 1982, they offered me a position. They created a job because at that time, games were being sold out. PR and media relations at the time was a huge part of what the club was doing. Mary lobbied for an assistant. They gave it to me for the grand total of $10,300 a year. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven. So I remember going home and saying to my dad, I got hired today. Oh, you did? What do you? How much they make? How much they paying you? That was the first thing he said. How much they paying you? I said $10,300. He said, how much? I said $10,300. He said that's not really a job. That's not real money. So my dad right away was beating me up to go in there and ask him for more money. I'm like, Dad, I just got hired today. I'm not going in and asking him for more money. Right. So anyway, 82-83 season, I was employed, if you want to call it that. They went to the championship that year. 83-84 was the year the Blast beat St. Louis. I was still the PR assistant at that time. I had started to travel then with the team, so I probably did 6 or 7 road trips that year because Mary didn't want to travel all the time, and there were some places like Cleveland and Pittsburgh where she didn't really want to go. So I got to travel a little bit. So that was, I was a big shot at that point. Boy, 20-year-old kid traveling around the country, with a soccer team. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. 84-85, I still had my position there. I was probably making $13,000 at the time. And near the end of the season, Mary came to me and said, hey, can you come in and talk to me? And I thought, yeah, sure. Went in, closed the door, and she said, so I have some interesting news for you. And yeah. She said, I'm leaving. And I said, you're leaving where? She said, I'm leaving. Bernie got a job in St. Louis. And she, at that point, was Mary Miklas, so they had been married. And she said, Bernie got a job in St. Louis working for the Post-Dispatch. Bob Paston used to be the sports editor at the News American. He left the News American to go to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and Bernie went with him. Bernie eventually wound up going to Dallas and then back to St. Louis, and now he's a huge fixture and has been in St. Louis for 25 years. But Mary said, I'm leaving. And the position's going to be open, and I'm going to recommend that you get the job. But, they're going to interview people, and if you don't get it, don't be upset. And you're only 20, I think I was 22 or 23. I was 22 at the time, and she's like, there aren't a lot of 22-year-old PR guys. But anyway, I hope you get it, and, I'm leaving, and it was quickly. She's like, Bernie starts on May the 24th, and this was probably May the 3rd. Long story short there, I got the job. Stayed in that capacity until 1988, became the assistant general manager, but still did all of the media relations stuff, and in 1991-92 season, became the general manager and stayed there until 1998.
Well, now, how come you left there?
Well, the ownership group changed again. I had worked for all the owners. I guess I am maybe the only guy. I'd have to think that through, though. I may be the only person that has ever worked for every indoor soccer owner in town, I think. I'd have to sit down and really go through it, but I think I am. I worked for Bernie Roden, who owned the team in the early 80s.
Right.
I worked for Nathan Scher, who owned the team in the mid-'80s. I worked for Ed Hale, who owned it in the late 80s and early 90s. And then Ed got out of it in 1992, and a gentleman named Bill Staley, who was a businessman up in Hunt Valley, who owned a company called Microprose, he opened it, or reopened it, or assumed ownership of it. And I worked for Bill, and in the 1996 area, in that range, Bill moved to Raleigh, North Carolina to open a new business. And he had said in 96 when he left, he said, I'm probably giving you my 3 years notice that I won't be doing this a whole lot longer. I'm going to move to Raleigh. Technically, he moved to Cary, but he said, I'm going to move to Raleigh. I'm going to open this company. I think it was called Interactive Magic. He said, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to live, and eventually I'm going to get tired of going back and forth to Baltimore. My kids will be grown, so I'm giving you 3 years notice. Turned out to be 2 years notice. So he sold the team back to Ed, and Ed wanted his own people involved, and I wasn't one of his own people, and that was it. So, Ed's done great. So obviously the Blast still is alive, which is amazing given all the incarnations of the various leagues that they've played in. But so that ended it in '98. I got a pretty good offer from the Buffalo team. I think my position ended in April with the Blast, and in June I went up to Buffalo and talked to them about running there. Effectively being the GM. Without a vice president's title, because they had a vice president, but he wasn't really directly involved every day. But I would have, from all intents and purposes, I would have been the general manager. And they made me, honestly, would have paid me considerably more than I was making with the Spirit/Blast. But it just wasn't right for me at that point, although it was a good franchise, and I'd made the right call because a year later they went out of business. But
it's Buffalo.
But yeah, it's Buffalo. Now, I did go up there in June, and it was really nice, and I had a nice steak. But I also saw enough football games there to know that the golfing window was pretty short in Buffalo, and it's awfully cold. And we had played there enough to know. Now, the one advantage was they had a great building, and they did have hockey there. But it just wasn't, the timing wasn't right for me. So that was the end of soccer for me. Okay,
so now you're excuse me. Now you're done with the Blast, and then you get into radio. How does that happen? That's a question I've heard people talk about. How does it go from general manager of the Baltimore Blast to being on the radio?
Okay, so I was doing I knew people in the media, and had worked in the media essentially for my whole adult life when I was in the soccer business. And the World Cup came around in 2002, and I was asked to do some sort of special guest stuff. Come in, talk about the World Cup. Come in, tell me about these teams. Let's talk about the U.S. team. The U.S., of course, had a dismal 1998 World Cup, and in 2002, which turned out to be very, very successful for them, there was a lot of interest in the U.S. World Cup team in 2002. So anyway, I went in and did some World Cup stuff, and 2 or 3 weeks later, they asked me, hey, would you like to come in and talk about sports every day? And I said, well, yeah, sure. I do that every day anyway. I just don't do it on the radio. So that was how it started. I was just a once-a-week guest during the World Cup for, 6 weeks. And when the World Cup ended in early July, they said, do you want to do a sports talk show in 3 weeks? So that's how it started.
So that's how that started.
Yeah.
And while you're on the air, for, 12 years?
12 years. 12 years and a month.
There were a lot of crazy things that you came up with, and one of those is the Chinese lunch bet. What is the Chinese lunch bet?
Well, I love Chinese food. That's, for starters. And I always felt like, if we were going to make literally almost every day you're on the radio, you could bet on something, right? You could bet on something every day. There's a game being played. There's a guy that's in a slump. There's a pitcher who's pitching great. There's a football team that has 6 games in a row that they've won or lost. You could bet on something every day when you're on the radio, and it just sort of flies off as, I bet you they don't win tonight. And rather than saying, I bet you $10, I just came up with this thing of, when you go out for lunch and you go to some Chinese place somewhere, the lunch thing is, $5.95 or $6.95. I don't know. So instead of me collecting $7 from you if I win the bet, why don't you just take me to lunch and we'll go have Chinese food somewhere and everybody will be happy. And that way, even if I lose the bet, I just go spend $12 or $15 and we go have Chinese food. So that's an interesting question. Nobody's ever asked me that. See, you're already in landmark territory. No one's ever asked me how I came up with the Chinese lunch bet.
We're going to follow up with another one. The hardest thing to do in sports is to stop losing.
Correct.
Yeah. Where does that come from? Is that a coachism? Is that something you picked up from a coach? Is that something you heard? Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from. It's funny you say that. It comes from an old mentor of mine named Al Miller, and Al was the general manager of the Cleveland team, and Al was in his 50s when I was running the Spirit, and I would have been in my mid-30s at that point, and Al and I were fierce rivals because Cleveland and Baltimore were huge rivals. But we were very, very good friends. I went to Cleveland and played in his member guest a couple of times. Anytime he came to Baltimore, we went to dinner. We were very, very good friends. And we had a sort of a commonality of marketing ideas. Cleveland and Baltimore both wound up putting logos on the front of our jerseys. They had a gas station, and we had a candy company on ours. So there were a lot of things about sports and marketing that he and I agreed on. But he was much wiser and much more sage than I was because he had worked in the North American Soccer League. He worked in the MISL. He was older and wiser than I was. So we were playing in Cleveland during I want to say it was in 96, 97 season or something, and we were sort of struggling at the time. And I remember we were having dinner and talking about and his teams were always highly, highly competitive. They won a couple of championships. And I remember saying, one of the most frustrating things about running a team is there's no book or there's no there's nowhere to go to figure out how to get your team to stop losing. If your car breaks down and you want to go to the library and get that Chilton manual and try to figure out how to replace if you want to try to replace the fuel pump in your car, there's some internet site that you can learn how to do that. If you want to fix your deck out here in the back because a couple of the pieces of wood splinter, you could go to a website somewhere and type in, how do I fix my deck? And it'll tell you. But if you go into any website and you type in, how do I get my sports team to stop losing, nothing comes up. And I just said at that point, once you start losing, and this goes for any sport, really, whether or not you're playing tennis or golf or basketball or football or whatever, or chess, once you start losing, it's just really, really hard to stop doing it because there's no formula, there's no blueprint, there's no outline, there's no book. I feel like A Few Good Men when Kevin Bacon says, how do you know where the mess hall is? There's got to be a book to tell me where the mess hall is. And the kid says, I just follow everybody to the chow line. There's just no book about losing. That doesn't exist. You have to figure it out yourself. And of course, some of that is, maybe you catch some team one night when they're not doing any good. But the toughest thing to do in sports is to stop losing. To me, there's no question about that. And you see it over and over and over when you could be playing great. Ask the Cowboys this, for 5 of the last 10 years, they start off 5-1 or 6-1, and then they peter out and don't make the playoffs because it's very, very difficult to stop losing. The other teams are trying. The schedule gets tougher. Somebody's girlfriend gets mad at them. Somebody hurts their shoulder. There's lots of little nuggets that go into it. But it came from just Al and I sitting around talking about sports and talking about our teams and being frustrated at the fact that we couldn't beat Cleveland ever.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you something. You have to answer this question.
Okay.
Knock, knock. Now, I got to tell you, when I heard that, I was driving, and I didn't get into an accident, but I don't know how the people driving behind me did.
I can't even look at you.
I was all over the road. Now, everyone asks questions about Merton.
Right.
Will Merton be a part of your blog?
Right.
Do you know who Merton is?
Right.
Where's Merton?
We need a Bible so I can put my what is it? What do you do in court? You put your right hand on the Bible,
Right? You take your oath or whatever.
Take the oath. I do not know who he is. I had said for a long time when I was on the radio that I never wanted to meet him. I didn't want to know who he was. I didn't want him to come up to me at some event and say in his regular voice, "Hey, I'm Merton." I never wanted it. Now I kind of do. To be honest with you, now I wouldn't mind if I'm out somewhere one day or if I'm at Mountain Branch or I'm in a Royal Farm somewhere and if he wants to come up and say, hey, you're not going to believe it, but I'm Merton. I wouldn't mind meeting him now. But
then you have to verify that because now you just put, now you're going to have all these listeners.
I know.
2 or 3
no,
of
I
these
know.
listeners.
Right. So, of course, you were alluding to the famous day when he completely got me with the knock-knock joke. Which he 1,000,000% got me. And, of course, his old famous line was Peyton Manning is better than Johnny Who, in reference to Johnny U. And at the end of one of our conversations one day when he had me flustered, he said, hey, Andrew, before I go, knock, knock. And I said, who's there? And he said, Johnny. And it's like Simon Says, it was just knee-jerk for me to say Johnny Who. And there was this pregnant pause, and he said, exactly. So if you think you almost drove off the road, I literally had to, I had to stop the show. I mean, because it killed me. It was so funny, and I fell into it so perfectly. And so anyway, I know people, and there were some times. Look, honestly, there was a time when I made him go away for 30 days, and I think I don't remember if it was Glenn that was producing at the time, but I don't remember who was producing. But he said something that said something about Bob in Parkville that I thought was over the top. And I am not a censoring type, and I say, who cares what people say? But he said something about Bob in Parkville that I thought was way over the top. And I said, you tell him that's it for him for 30 days. No calls. Don't take him. He's not coming on the air. He's got to at least abide by some small shred of decency. So, some people would question why I would have him on, and I would always say the same thing. He's a caller. We do talk radio. This is what we do. Everybody's not supposed to fall in line. There's not a form. And, my rules always were, if you don't get me in trouble with the FCC, you can come on and say whatever you want. You can beat me up if you want, but just don't get me in trouble with the FCC. So Merton was one of a kind, though, and I can tell you for sure that almost every time the Ravens and the Colts played, he entered to my mind. I can remember sitting in the press box at Lucas Oil Stadium the year the Ravens lost to the Colts, and I can remember saying, well, there is one silver lining. There'll be an hour's worth of calls tomorrow morning when he chimes in, and of course, then the Ravens beat the Colts too a couple of years ago. But
so Merton,
he was
if
something.
If you're out there,
yeah, if you're out there, email me.
We need to get you and Andrew hooked up.
18 in a row at gmail.com, Merton. If you know how to use the internet, email me. I would like to meet him now, and honestly, I never wanted to do that before, but I would like to meet him now. It would be would be kind of cool.
I'd love to see how you would incorporate him with the.
And I obviously I know he doesn't live in Indianapolis. I mean I don't know that, but I mean I'd bet you 100 Chinese lunches that he's in Baltimore somewhere. So anyway, so there you go.
Okay,
Merton, another trip down memory lane.
Yeah. Well, with Drew's Morning Dish, is there any plan to get the band back together? Some of the regulars. Bob from Parkville. Is there any thought with that, or is this blog still new?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously it would have to be more on the podcast side or video side, which is fine. And I'm looking for podcast content, so that would work out great. I don't know how much of it translates in the written form, but sure, if the opportunity came along for me to go sit down with Bob in Parkville and talk to him, or Crazy Rick in Reisterstown, if he's not incarcerated somewhere for not paying a gambling debt, or yeah, sure. Jerry and Timonium. In fact, Jerry and I are friends. We'll probably have a lunch here together one of these days, pretty soon, and maybe that'll be my first one. Maybe I'll make Jerry and Timonium my first Drew's Friend video blog or something.
Yeah, that would be interesting to. That'd be interesting to see how you handle that. Now let's get to August 22nd.
Okay.
The massacre, or Black Friday, as you
Right.
as you call it, in one word. Now you're a man of many words. Okay, so I'm going to challenge you in one word. How do you describe that?